The Bob and Almeady Chisum Jones story is the one we've chosen to present. It's a story about a family that goes back to the 1860s here in North Texas. Bob and Almeady both were the children of a white father and a slave mother. So the story itself starts there. On this panel, learn about the world in which Bob, Almeady, and their family lived. In Texas, efforts after the war to improve the lives of former slaves ended when Reconstruction was shut down early. Some freed slaves toiled as sharecroppers, others did menial work in cities, and some farmed and had businesses in freedmen's communities. Bob Jones established his own family ranch and farm. For years, the KKK was active in Tarrant, Denton, and Dallas counties. Jim Crow laws affected many aspects of everyday life. Being in the wrong place or being targeted by the wrong people was dangerous. The Historical Society learned Bob's father's story from family lore, letters, and official records. A Civil War expert who lives in Colleyville, Mike Patterson, dug deep and uncovered Leeser's Civil War service. The Denton County Courthouse burned in 1875, so we looked elsewhere for land records. The census, while sometimes inaccurate, gave us clues as to the whereabouts of Leeser and his wife. The story of Bob's mother, Elizabeth, is mostly unknown. She is listed by age and gender in an 1850 slave census. In 1870, for the first time, she and other African Americans were listed in the census by name. Today we know her by the smart, hardworking children she raised and their descendants. We have her eyeglasses, like today's readers, in our exhibit in the library. There's also a photograph of her daughter Ellen and Ellen's family. Bob was extraordinary. He bridged two cultures. To be successful, he had to carefully navigate the white world. He took advantage of opportunities, such as trail drives, as a way to make money in economically depressed post-war Texas. Unfortunately, Bob did not leave a diary or an account of his life. People often spoke of his being ethical and business savvy. He knew how to get things done. 25 years after his death, most of the land he had proudly owned, free and clear, was under Lake Grapevine. A portion of his original homestead is part of the Nature Center. Cattle Baron John Simpson Chisum was a mythic figure in the West, worthy 100 years later of being portrayed in a movie by John Wayne. How Jency and her children became part of his life is a story nearly impossible to fathom today. They were collateral for $814 worth of cattle. Some writers have portrayed Jency as a beautiful mulatto girl who won the heart of John Chisum and bore him 2 daughters. Our version of their relationship is based on courthouse records, remembrances from the Chisum Ranch, and other clues. It's not known where Jency was born or whether John Chisum's uncle was her father. We believe she did the best she could with the circumstances given her. Until age 14, Almeady Chisum was raised on a ranch owned by the legendary John Chisum. It was the Wild West, cattle rustlers, range wars, Indian fights, and more. Her mother told her John Chisum was her father. Around 1870, as John moved his cattle operation to New Mexico, Almeady, her sister and mother, moved to Bonham. She and Bob met and in 1875 married. This illustration, drawn by Karen David Inco of Grapevine after studying a variety of photographs from the 1890s and on, envisions Bob and Almeady on their wedding day. Throughout her long and productive life, Almeady was smart, loving, and hardworking. Oh, and to run a household of 12, a master of organizational skills. Faith, family, and education gave meaning to the Jones family. Heritage, too. Each Juneteenth, the day in 1865 when Texas slaves found out they were free, we would all go picnic, daughter Yuji said. A family tradition, said grandson Bobby Jones, was busyness. Everyone was always busy. It took a lot of effort to run a farm and ranch. The girls' white dresses are all handmade. Downstairs in the library is a dress made by Yuji that was cleaned and restored by the Denton County Office of History and Culture. The dress and other Jones memorabilia will be on permanent display at the African American Museum in Denton. By 1928, all of the Jones children had married, and most farmed near the home place. This map shows where Bob and Almeady and their children, along with a few of their children's in-laws, lived. There was the white community, the colored community, and the Jones community, said granddaughter Betty Jones. A family tree shows each of the 10 children, along with the name of his or her spouse, and how many children they had. Many of Bob and Almeady's descendants are buried in Medland Cemetery, which is now in Trophy Club. Alice, Emma, and their husbands and families are buried in the historic New Trinity Cemetery in Haltom City. On Christmas Day, 1936, Bob Jones passed away at his home. His funeral a few days later was attended by 500 people, both black and white. Inside the Baptist Church in Roanoke, a section was reserved for blacks. Many people of both colors stood outside. Bob was buried in the colored section of Medland Cemetery. In 1949, Almeady died. Her obituary in the Denton newspaper was short and had few details. She was buried next to her husband. This illustration by Karen Davidinko shows her 2 youngest grandsons listening to her stories about growing up on the Chisum Ranch. Daughter Yuji embraced life and was loved by many. She even saved the home place from being taken by the Army Corps of Engineers for Lake Grapevine. Isn't Yuji's dress pretty? Our graphic designer, Courtney Frey, used computer techniques to colorize it based on hue and saturation and how light reacted with the black and white photo. She didn't simply pick a color that looked good, but made informed choices based on what colors were worn back then. She calls it digital archaeology. When we reached Michael Tucker to ask about his friendship with Yuji, he couldn't believe that Yuji had kept the 4th grade class's thank you notes. As a remembrance, Yuji's great niece sent them all to him. A hallmark of the Jones family was education. Bob and Almeady, who had no formal education, insisted their 10 children go through the 8th grade. Their children's children and great-grandchildren went much farther. The Tuskegee Institute, Kansas State, University of Texas, Juilliard School, and many, many more. Bob and Almeady's 4 youngest grandchildren attended junior and senior high in Fort Worth, leaving around 5:30 a.m. and catching a bus home in the late afternoon. I.M. Terrell High School, the only black high school in town, attracted students from as far away as Roanoke and Weatherford. Few people in now Southlake remember Bob and Almeady, but many knew sons Jinx and Emery well. After their land was taken by eminent domain for Lake Grapevine, Jinx and Emery opened a livestock auction barn at the southeast corner of White's Chapel and Highway 114. It became a gathering place, and at one time was the largest business in Southlake. Lula and Elnora, their wives, ran the Jones Brothers Cafe. When black truckers passed by on their way to Lake Grapevine, a few would stop at the back door to ask for a sandwich or soda. At a time when there were no integrated cafes in the South, Lula would tell them to come to the front door to be served. For many folks, the highlight of summer was the Jones family picnic. When Jinx and Emery started their auction barn, picnics and baseball games were moved from the picnic grounds at the Jones home place to a field next to their auction barn. Picnics featured barbecue, snow cones, carnival rides and games, and dances. Guitars and fiddlers played for people to dance on a wooden platform. Blacks and whites danced separately. No liquor was allowed. Emory sponsored the Grapevine Auctioneers baseball team. On Sunday afternoons, 100 or more people would be in the stands. Bob and Almeady Jones live on in their many descendants. Last year, those attending a Jones reunion toured Walnut Grove Elementary, named for the school Bob Jones had built for his grandchildren and other area children. Bob Jones Road was officially named in the 1970s. In 1988, the city annexed land up to Lake Grapevine that included part of the old Jones homestead. In 1998, Bob Jones Park was established. Bob Jones Nature Center and Preserve, on land that had once been Jones property, opened in 2008. The legacy of Bob and Almeady Jones is reflected in the words of Grapevine Mayor Bill Tate and others. Take a look. The panels in the town hall lobby are just part of the display. Newly uncovered documents, photographs, and Jones family heirlooms are part of the display in the Southlake Library.
When I saw the quilt and the suit and the dress, I was speechless. It meant the world to me. Really. And that's why it's so special.
Working with the Southlake Historical Society, the Jones family agreed to place these heirlooms with the Denton County Office of History and Culture for restoration and permanent display in their African American Museum.
The shirt is also something that is store-bought, and so we kind of assume that it probably came from the same department store that was actually kind of a high-end department store in Fort Worth that catered to men. The pants then are, by looking at the stitch work, were handmade. And sometimes you could have a mixture of like the dress, where we think that the dress itself was handmade, but the ornaments of the dress were actually store-bought. So that was really, common, that you could go to a dry goods store, purchase lace that was pre-made. Not many people knew how to make lace, and then be able to make a dress. So the quilt is a family quilt that was made later, but made with material that was contributed by members of the family. So each, contributed maybe a shirt or a dress or a hanky or something or an apron or something that had significance to them, and then they were added to the quilt.
The panels that are here, we decided we wanted to focus a little more personally on the family. And so that was church, family, fun, because they were a rambunctious family, just like any family of 10 children would be, and the farm and ranch that the Bob Jones family had. That's the 4 different groups. We've focused just a few things on that give a little more information about their lives.
And I feel in my heart that this family is finally getting the recognition that they deserve.
If the Jones family were standing here today, I think they would be blown away by Southlake and everything that's grown up around them.